My name is Stanley Turkel. That's Turkel. I am a New Yorker, born and bred in the wonderful city of New York, and raised my family and my 4 children there. And if you didn't realize it, it's the best city in the world. And I'm happy in Alexandria, and certainly happy in this wonderful hermitage place with all these great staff and programs and facility. Just a great place to be. My experience in the service, the United States service, was vastly different than the 2 you just heard. I was an early graduate of a high school in New York at age 15 years of age. So I started college when I was 16 years old. I turned 16 in September 1941, and I started at New York University. I was young, of course, inexperienced, and how shall I say, way over my head. But who could have predicted that a war would break out, and that I would be on the campus of NYU, and the war was starting, and so as a young 16-year-old, what did I know? Not much, inexperienced, and I thought, how exciting. So what did I do? Much to my mother's chagrin and unhappiness, I enlisted in the United States Army Air Force. Don't forget, there was a Navy Air Force and an Army Air Force in those days, no Air Force on its own. So I enlisted in the Army Air Force at age 16, and I was on the campus as a freshman. All my classmates were 2 years older than I was, so I felt as though I was some sort of child among men. But nothing to be done about that. But I was in the Reserve Officers Training Corps. And in those days, that was called the ROTC, an initialing that was widely used apparently. So I had then training. We had fake guns. I'm talking about rifles that were made of wood. We had uniforms, which we wore, and we marched in drill formation with those fake wooden guns. Also, I did shooting they had a rifle range, and I had certain times when I went down to the range and shot and tried to improve my marksmanship. I was enlisted in the United States Army Air Force, as I said, as an aviation cadet. What that was that if you were in good physical shape, lucky with good eyesight and good coordination, you could be selected to become either a pilot or a navigator. Those were the 2. The third was a bombardier, but apparently that was not as highly, did not require as high a physical attribute as the other 2. In any event, I was set to become, if I ever got called in, and ultimately I did get called. When I was 17 and a half years old, I was called to start my service, and I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Fort Dix was an entry place. It was a permanent base in New Jersey, and I think I was there for 2 weeks is all, to get a uniform, to get examined physically, and to be signed up. And then I was sent to my first Air Force base. Are you ready for this? Blytheville, Arkansas. Blytheville, Arkansas? Did you ever hear of such a place? It was apparently an Air Force base that was built fairly recently. So it was, how shall I say, it had barracks, it had a mess hall, and very little else. It was poorly facilitated. But nevertheless, we engaged in basic training, and that was, I was in good physical shape. I considered myself to be an athlete and played all the sports, and so I was able to take it in stride and come out on top. In any event, we did that. I can't remember how many months I was there, but we finished our basic training and then was shipped off to Columbus, Ohio, to the Lockburn Air Force Base. Now then, that was a permanent base which flew B-17s and trained pilots and crew for the Flying Fortress, which was the very airplane that flew over Germany from London and from England to bomb German early in the war. Very successful bombing runs of these flying fortresses. You cannot imagine how big a flying fortress is. Well, maybe you can now, because there are passenger ships that you have flown on before this pandemic that were that large. But in those years, I'm talking about the 1940s, that plane was a fortress. It was. That was properly good naming for it, a flying fortress. In any event, so I trained on flying fortresses. My training was slowed up because apparently the losses over Germany were less than they expected, so they didn't need to train these up-and-coming aviation cadets. So I then did a variety of other jobs on the Air Force bases. At Lockburn, I was a phys ed instructor. I used to take the crews out on long runs, on exercise routines, and I was, can you imagine, Stanley Turkel, nice Jewish boy from the Bronx in New York, wearing suntan pants with an orange stripe down the side and a t-shirt that said Lockburn Air Force Base, and I would train these other cadets, go out on long runs, long distance runs, exercise routines, because I was apparently, by their measurement, in better shape than they were. And then I also had a job once as a parachute inspector. What does that mean? It means that the pilots who were in training, you wore a small packaged parachute on their chest, and it hooked on to a strap formation around their waist, and this was, yes, it had an oxygen mask, and thank you. And in any event, this parachute I had to examine the parachute from the outside to make sure that it was not unraveling, that it was still in good folded condition, so that if unfortunately one of these guys who were way up needed to use it, that it would open when they jumped. And so that was a job I had. I also had a job as a flight engineer. That was the best of all. I flew on the flying fortresses. I trained to be a flight engineer. I was not an officer. I was an enlisted man, but they had a crew, and I was one of the crew. Usually a minor member of the crew, relatively inexperienced, but nevertheless necessary. So I had that experience. I then was shipped out after a while and went down to Turner Field in Albany, Georgia. Well, that was a field that was built just for World War II. So like Blytheville, Arkansas, it was relatively unfinished, relatively unfurnished, I should say, with not a lot of facilities. But you know, when you're 18 years old, you don't know what you don't know. You are inexperienced, and the excitement of being in the service and being away from home was extraordinary. In a measure, it was like being away at college when you're a teenager. And with my friends, we did dumb things, we behaved badly, we did stupid things, we got caught sometimes, but we had how shall I say, when you're 18 years old, I called it a lot of fun. Stupid, inexperienced, childish fun. In any event, so those, and maybe one or two other bases I'm not mentioning, I spent 2.5 years in the service and had a variety of different experiences, never went overseas, then when the war ended, as Dan described and John described, I was with others then, because the war was not continuing against Japan, I was discharged and came home. And coming home, I will inform you, Dan was very modest about saying this. There's something called the GI Bill of Rights that was passed by the United States government. Don't forget, there were more than 2 million men, mostly, who served in various parts of the United States service during World War II, in the 4 years it took for us to beat Japan and Germany. So those 2 million men, the United States government was concerned about how to treat the returning veterans who were coming back from this service that they had, where they saved the United States government from being defeated by Japan and Germany. And what they remembered, you may not know this, or you may know it historically, you may know that after World War I, the veterans who came back from service were treated badly. The veterans from World War I were treated so badly, they were promised a bonus. And the bonus was never paid. And the veterans formed marches on Washington called the bonus marchers, who would come and protest. They hid out in, how many of you know where is Anacostia Flats, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., Anacostia Flats. And apparently that's where they set up a tent city, these bonus marchers who came back to try to get the Congress to give them the money that was promised to them, which they never ever got. What happened was that the United States under, I think, what president was it? I don't remember anymore. I think it was, maybe it was Hoover. He called upon Douglas MacArthur, the famous Douglas MacArthur general who won the war in World War II in the Far East, but he was then a young general, just beginning his career, well, beginning at the level of that career, and he headed up the army to disturb and break down these bonus marches and ship these protesting veterans back home without their bonus. So that was a great beginning to Douglas MacArthur's career. Anyway, I share that history with you because behind this kindly old face of mine is a historian. You may know that I spent my life, my working life, as a hotel man, and have managed hotels, managed large companies that ran and owned hotels, was a hotel consultant, and now I am the most widely published, believe it or not, even at this advanced age, the most widely published hotel consultant in the United States, with a record of 250 published articles and 10 books. So I became a hotel man and a hotel expert, but I managed hotels in my early years, was a general manager of hotels. So I will leave you and finish my tale of experience by telling you that when I give praise to how this place is managed, I'm talking about our own Hermitage, and say that Chris Gardner and his staff and his crew and all the people who work here run this place like a professional hotel. And I give them all the credit in the world because it is a tough job, never to be taken for granted. And what they did and what they're doing and getting through this pandemic and the difficult circumstances that we find our country in, that they run this place as well as it's run is a miracle. Thank you. Oh, one more thing. If you want to see what an 18-year-old dopey kid looks like in uniform, I'll pass this around and you can see Stanley Turkel when he was just enlisted in the Air Force.
It's Marvin's turn. Where's Marvin?